The whole idea is it's supposed to be quite informal, but I do have slides and we just go through stuff, and then hopefully it helps, particularly from the point of view of technical entrepreneurship. So because I'm here in a science department, the whole idea is to help with commercialising science and technology and what that envisages and what that involves. But a lot of that is irrespective of the kind of business you're trying to start. So, and today's session is the third in the sort of series of 8 that I've put together, and is all about business plan structure and some strategic planning tools, so to help you think about the structure of your business and what it's going to achieve. And then over the coming weeks we'll look at those other areas as well. Okay, so we'll just get straight into what we mean by a business plan. So obviously some of you have, Patrick, you've got a business.
Across it.
Okay, but you haven't written a business plan for your business. You hear a lot about business plans when you are supposedly an entrepreneur. Either people ask you about whether you've got one, or you're told to go and have one and create one. So there's nothing magic about a business plan. It is really just a breakdown of what you envisage happening in your business and why you think it's going to be a success, how you're going to make it a success, and really you write it often for the purpose of raising money. So you might have to go to the bank manager, when those existed, and plead with them for some money to help fund your business. Or if it's a more sophisticated business in the sense that you're trying to raise money, it's a longer term tech startup, then you will certainly need a business plan to convince an investor who's going to take equity. And we talked about equity investment last week. So the structure of a business plan, firstly, I've listed a few things there. There's no hard and fast rules, but those are useful, I think, if nothing else. Usually you have an executive summary because, frankly, most people never read a business plan, even when they're given them. They will probably read the executive summary, and maybe, depending who you've given it to, if it's a bank manager or a financier, they will look at the finances. But you do have to have a bit more structure to the business plan. And so, because hardly anybody reads it, actually the point of writing a business plan really is for you as the entrepreneur and you as the founding team. I would recommend having a business plan, but what it means is you don't need to go and make it the sort of war and peace of your business. You keep it fairly succinct, and readable, and something that you can use within your own business. So kinds of things you'd expect to have in there: clearly an introduction about what the business is all about. Then, importantly, what the market is that you're tackling and why there is a market opportunity there. So in a business, clearly you need to generate sales. Somebody's got to buy your stuff. So what is the market that you're tackling? And it's very unlikely you'll be the only person in the market. So obviously we have competition to consider, and a business plan should outline who your competitors are. Partly for your own peace of mind, because then you'd have done some research, but also if somebody is going to invest in your business, they're going to want to know who you're up against. And obviously in a startup, technical startup, maybe if you've invented something new, you could argue, well, there is no competition because this is brand new stuff. But there's always people doing something similar. Maybe not quite the same, but you're going to have to compete against the incumbents in the marketplace. So if you're Tesla with your electric car when you started, maybe there was nobody else doing electric cars, but your competition was the standard diesel petrol car, and you were carving out a niche in the electric car market. So competition is important, but then you get into what is the product or the service or the technology, particularly in a tech startup, that you're going to offer. Now, in a tech startup, you have to often develop the product or the service. That's part of the hard, expensive thing. In a non-tech startup, in other words, a more regular type of business, you may have a product or service ready to go and you can go out and tackle the market straight away. But the business plan should outline what the product or service is, or what the technology is, and at kind of what stage it is. Does it need development? Does it need investment? Are you prototyping? What is new about it? Is it less expensive? Has it got new features that somebody wants, etc.? So you're setting out what it is that you're going to sell and why it's appealing. And then you've got to talk about who you're going to sell to. So customers in the broadest sense, obviously, if you're a consumer-facing business, it's kind of you and I as customers, potentially. But a lot of businesses are business to business. So they're actually going to be targeting other businesses, and that's the customers that you need to describe. So you have to first of all talk about the type of customer you have. Are they business customers? Are they consumers? Whereabouts are they? Are they reachable through the internet, through internet marketing and through internet sales, or are you on the road like a salesman or saleswoman selling your products? So you've got to outline who your customers are and why they might want to buy your product. So a bit about the demographics, what their need is. And then what's really important actually is the team that you have to execute on all this. So if somebody's going to invest in your company, they're going to want to understand probably a lot about the team, because that's who they're really investing in and they're putting their trust in. So the team, when it's a startup, it's usually the founders, and this is your opportunity to say a little bit about yourselves, but also who else you've managed to bring in. So you might have a few employees, you may have a couple of advisors, or you may have some people that you are either hoping to recruit or at least positions you want to fill. So again, in your business plan, you can say, we're looking for a marketing manager, or we're looking for a product manager or something, as well as the founding team. And then the key bit really is the finances, because obviously a business is not a business unless it's going to make money eventually, it's got to make a profit. So the finances is all about the revenue as well as the costs and the expenses, and breaking that down, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then, because it's a plan, it's not just about what the situation is now, you've also got to forecast your finances, but also forecast your business. So that's what the next steps is. So how is it you're going to take the business forward? What are your milestones? What can you be judged against, particularly if you're taking on investment? Because usually an investor won't put all their money in at once. So they'll perhaps put in their first tranche, hit some milestones, and you can get the rest. If you don't hit the milestones, they're not going to part with their cash. And the other thing that we often talk about here is the exit. So a good business plan will have a forward-looking view of what's going to happen in the long term and how is it going to potentially exit. Now, this is important for investors, as we discussed last week. An investor that puts their money in at the beginning or during a company growth is going to expect to make a return at the end in some way, either with dividends that are ongoing or by simply getting out of the business. But also the founders probably want to get out of the business eventually. Eventually you're going to have to retire, even if it's a very long-term business. So exit is that kind of leaving the business and how you intend to do it and what the strategy is. It doesn't have to be in great detail, but the kind of things you'd have a statement in there, like we expect to make a trade sale, so sell our company to another company, like our competitor or someone that's bigger than us in the future. You see this happening all the time. Facebook bought WhatsApp and Facebook bought Instagram as big examples. So that was Instagram's exit, if you like. Instagram sold to Facebook, and that was the next chapter of their business. And then the appendices are important because you want to keep the business plan quite succinct and readable and understandable, but you can refer to stuff in appendices. So these could be references, more detailed finances, CVs of the founders, etc. Yes, push all that into the appendices. That is kind of all you need. When you've written it all, that's when you go back and write the executive summary. So write it all out, then create a page or half-page executive summary, depending on how much you've got to talk about, and expect just the summary to be read, at least in the beginning, by anybody. Again, it depends what you define as an exit. Part of an exit is listing on a stock market. It's called an exit because it's a way that the initial shareholders, or the investor shareholders in that early stage of the journey, can realise some of their value, particularly for founders as well. So in order to realise that value, what it really means is selling your shares, possibly all of them, possibly some of them. What happens when you list on the stock market, which is what Facebook did, is your shares then become publicly tradable, and that means that following certain rules, you as a founder, so Mark Zuckerberg, could sell some of his shares on the stock exchange as well. So for him, that's kind of an exit. He's not left the business, but he's got to the stage where he can realise some of that value. And if he wanted to leave, he probably could. Business plan, when you talk about an exit, the kind of scenarios are a trade sale or an IPO, initial public offering, which is a listing on a stock market. And you can just literally put that down as a statement and perhaps a reason why you're aiming for that. And the time frame, 5 years, 10 years, something like that.
ICO.
ICO.
Yeah, is that not the new thing?
That's the initial coin offering,
Yeah.
you mean, in cryptocurrency land? Yeah. Cryptocurrency companies that are startups have used the ICO to raise money by offering their tokens.
So it's not quite an exit then?
No, it's the opposite really. It's more an entry because you're using it to raise money in a somewhat dubious way, actually. A cryptocurrency blockchain startup could have an ICO to raise some money just because it happens to work in a blockchain company because you issue these coins, but they'd still want an exit, which is probably a trade sale or a listing. So an important part, as I said, in your business plan is your financial projections and your financial planning. So again, there's no hard or fast rule, but just to think about some of the things you might cover. I think it is useful to aim for a 5-year view of what you're planning across the whole of the business plan. Obviously, there are some industries where things take a lot longer. So in a medical startup company, the first 3 to 5 years may just involve going to clinical trials, actually. And so you've actually got to go further. You've got to look further ahead. In an aerospace company, obviously building an aeroplane or building a car, those are long-term things. They take 5 to 10 years. So again, there you might try and look further out. But in a sort of a software startup company or a consumer sales company, I think 5 years is a good horizon. What you need to do is provide some detail in the early years, and then of course it's guesswork going further. Probably guesswork after a year, to be honest, but at least make it look like you've got a handle on it. So I would say the first 1 to 2 years you probably want to do a monthly projection, and I'll talk about that in a second. Then you might say, okay, we're just going to look at quarterly numbers for the sort of 3 to 4 years, and then just give a 5-year what's going to happen in the year. So what do we mean by that? Well, we break it down into some key headings. If you're a tech startup, you're almost certainly going to want some grants because they're available for tech startups. So Innovate UK and Medical Research Council and various companies and organisations have grants available. So you can take grant income and you will obviously be projecting that. So, perhaps in the first year you're going to get £100,000 grant, and then in the third year you're going to go for a £200,000 grant. That's in your projections. The key thing is you're making a projection. Now, there could be a milestone. In other words, I'm going to definitely get it by then and be judged against it. But equally, it is a projection, so you don't know whether you're going to get your grant accepted in that particular time frame. So you have to obviously take that into account. But in your table, in your financial projections table, you'd look at grant income perhaps, and sales income, of course. That's the other major income. So if you're in a position to start selling products quite early on, sales numbers will appear early on, and then you can break that down. In month 5 and 6 and 7, I expect this amount of sales, project it out. If you're a true tech startup, you may not generate sales for quite a while, maybe a couple of years, depending on how much work needs to be done in the company. So obviously you need to be aware that that's going to be a costly period because you've not got the income. That's why the grants is important and why investment is important. So cost of sales is important. What people tend to forget is when they're making products particularly, applies to services as well, but when they're making products, it has cost money to make the product. You've obviously had to buy in raw materials or bits and pieces, and those are what's called your cost of sales. In other words, in order to make the machinery, if that's what you're making, you've got all those bits that cost you money first, and then hopefully you sell it at a profit. So you have to have that included there, again, because it's a cash flow issue. You can't make anything to sell until you've got the money to buy those initial bits of raw material. And sometimes you need to buy machinery, which we call capital expenditure. So CapEx also has to be highlighted. Usually those items are not very regular. They're sort of one-offs. I need this bit of kit to kit out the factory or the production line. So again, they will appear in your financial projections because you'll need that cash up front. So very clearly, you'll start to see where the expensive periods are and how you're going to cope with that. Obviously, running a company, you have overheads, so you need to detail your salaries. If you're growing the team, salaries are going to increase every time you recruit. You're going to have a bigger salary bill. Most people within a company have some travel and subsistence. They may be marketing, they may be raising money, they may be doing some sales and travelling around, so you've got to budget for that. And then there's the other sort of overhead expenses related to renting an office, paying for electricity and gas, paying for stationery, etc. So those are included there. So you can obviously, in a spreadsheet, create your financial projections and break that down into as much detail as you want. But generally you have these sort of line items, and then going across in time, you make an estimate of how much it's all going to cost. Add it all up, and one of the key things is to also monitor the bank balance in this projection and know what to do when it goes below zero, because then you have a cash flow issue. So basically with that financial projection, you can then start to see where you need investment if you need it, if you need a bank loan and so on. And that's all part of the business plan, is how you get through that initial expensive period and then how you grow the company going forward. The other thing about a business plan is that, as I said, it's probably important for you to do it for your own business than actually writing it for someone else. So as part of the exercise of writing a business plan, there are some other tools that can help you flesh it out. And also you can put these things in as tables. And then if somebody does read it, it shows that you've thought about the business plan a bit more. Okay. So who's heard of a SWOT analysis? Anybody heard of SWOT? Yeah. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. You put it on a matrix like that. What you're trying to do here is just work out what the strengths of your company are, for example, what its weaknesses are, maybe in your business plan explaining how you're going to mitigate those weaknesses in the future, how you're going to improve. So maybe at the beginning the weakness is you don't have a marketing manager, so you can't do a great deal of marketing, and how you're going to get around that is recruiting. So that's an example. Opportunities, so where is the business going to flourish, what's it got as prospects in its future, and what are the threats? And usually threats, of course, are things like competitors, but there can be other existential threats. So economic downturns can be a really big problem. You can look obviously at the bigger picture, so war is a threat, oil prices going up is a threat and so on, but also just very locally, what can go wrong in your business just because of the competitor launches a product before you, or the price of something you need goes up, etc. So again, think about that and talk about that in the business plan, because the more you can think about these problems, the more likely you can deal with them when they come along. And then you can put that up as a table in the business plan as well, or put it as an appendix. And the key thing is, it's all very nice having it in the business plan, but if you can see the business plan as an evolving document that perhaps you review every 6 months within the business and go back and update, then you can go back to the SWOT analysis and say, okay, what have we dealt with? What did we miss? Create a new SWOT analysis as you develop through time. And that will really help work out how your business is developing. So another useful tool is something called a value chain analysis. So of course, however simple your business, you always sit in some kind of supply chain. You're always buying something, even if it's just electricity to run your computer. You're buying something off somebody and then you're selling to someone, and usually it's an extended chain. So, even when you're buying something off somebody, they themselves are buying something off someone else. And your customer may actually sell on to another customer. So you can get the feel for it here. It's important because if you can do an analysis of who these people are, these organisations are, you can start to see maybe where there are some weak links. So if you are, for example, reliant on one supplier, perhaps a Chinese supplier, provides a particular component, it's nice and inexpensive, but it's the only place you can find it, and you need it, what happens if they stop supplying? Either because they no longer can export, they go bust, or it just becomes so expensive to buy it. So by doing this analysis, it kind of feeds into your SWOT analysis as well. You can see where the threats are. Same with the customers. You may well end up selling to just one big customer. Well, what happens if they don't want to buy something from you anymore? The other way to look at this when you do this sort of analysis is think about not just who your customer is, as in its name, or the company name or organisation names, but what kind of customer they are. So where are they located geographically? What kind of sector are they in? So are you selling into like the automotive sector or the medical sector? And actually, could you sell into other sectors? by perhaps just changing your message, but they still need the same sort of thing. So that's why this analysis is useful, because you can start to see other opportunities. Sometimes you hear about companies that are vertically integrated, and that means they actually span across their own value chain. So a good example of that is a company called Tetra Pak. So all drunk orange juice cartons and milk cartons. So they're a good example of a company that's vertically integrated, because actually what they do is they started making the packaging material, and then over time they've gradually become more and more up and downstream in their supply chain. And what that means is they actually grow the forests that make the trees, if you like, that they then pulp to create the paper and source for the cartons. And actually what they do is they provide the material that goes in the bottling or cartoning machine. But actually what they do is they supply the machines as well, and insist that the machines are run with their packaging material. And the way their material works is they basically create a big tube of material, and the machine just pinches it. So you have this big tube of liquid that's pinched into the carton, and then it's sold to the end user. So what they've done over time is captured quite a big swathe of the business, from growing the trees right through to pretty much the finished packaged article. Yeah? And there are other companies you can think and look up that have done this. Reason that's important is when you do analysis like this, obviously as a startup you can't expect to grow up and down your value chain, but it could become a strategy. So your business plan could be, we're sitting here, we are going to become our own supplier in a way, because we're going to go downstream a bit and make the product, or we're going to go upstream because we know our customer assembles it to something else and we want to do that bit. Yeah, so it's a useful way of planning what your business might look like in the future.